When Evan Kearns appeared at the gate of the Grand Lake Ranger Station in June 2022, he was barely recognizable. Barefoot, emaciated, with a beard reaching his chest and draped in a tattered piece of cloth instead of clothing. The man had been missing for 7 years while on a volunteer SAR mission in one of the most remote areas of Rocky Mountain. A person all reports had already declared dead, but the most terrifying thing was not his appearance. The most terrifying thing was what he told about those 7 years, about what happened beneath the mountain, about the other people who had once been there, and about the entity he insisted was still alive, still waiting in the darkness. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of June 6, 2015, in the Grand Lake area of Colorado, the early summer weather was chilly, but the sky was covered with gray clouds, signaling the unpredictable changes typical of the Rocky Mountains. At 8:12 a.m., the camera at the North Inlet Trail entrance in Rocky Mountain National Park captured footage of a search and rescue team SUV pulling into the parking area beside the trailhead. 5 SR members stepped out one by one, including 28-year-old Evan Kearns, an experienced volunteer who specialized in difficult terrain routes. They were preparing to deploy for the search of a hiker reported missing 2 days earlier. According to the departure log recorded by the area ranger, Evan's gear included a standard SR backpack, radio, small first aid kit, and updated topographic map. The team planned to split into 2 groups, advancing deep into the dense spruce forest along the North Inlet stream and checking side branches leading up the slopes toward Cascade Creek. North Inlet Trail is notorious for its thick canopy, numerous steep and broken sections, and small rock crevices that can easily disorient those unfamiliar with the terrain. Morning light was almost completely blocked by the interlocking tree canopy, making the space darker and quieter than usual. At 8:37 a.m., Evan signed his name in the team registration log at the trailhead, adding a brief note that his group was expanding the search toward Cascade Creek and expected to return to the rendezvous point by late afternoon that same day. This was the last official record of him in a managed area. By 2:47 p.m., after sweeping several lower forest zones, the team leader authorized Evan to separate and check a narrow side branch beside a small stream, an area he had surveyed on previous missions and was considered easily overlooked without in-depth coverage. Around 3:09 p.m., the radio logged Evan's final transmission, stating he was proceeding a few hundred meters farther toward Cascade Falls to check for signs. Minutes later, the weather changed rapidly. Strong winds swept through the valley. Low clouds descended, and visibility dropped to just a few dozen meters, a characteristic phenomenon of sudden low-pressure systems in the Rocky Mountains. When Evan failed to return to the agreed meeting point by 6:30 p.m., his group began backtracking along the planned route, but found no signs of movement and received no radio response. At 8:12 p.m., after multiple unsuccessful radio calls, and with deteriorating weather conditions continuing, the team commander officially reported Evan Kearns missing to the Grand Lake Ranger Station and activated an emergency search file per Rocky Mountain National Park protocol. Immediately after Evan Kearns' missing person file was activated, a large-scale search operation was launched at dawn on June 7, 2015, involving coordination between the local search and rescue team, Rocky Mountain National Park Rangers, the Grand County K-9 unit, and Colorado Air Patrol observation helicopter crews. The initial scope covered the entire North Inlet Trail, western slope side branches, and the forest strip surrounding Cascade Creek. A total of 42 people were mobilized on the first day, divided into 8 teams equipped with handheld GPS, high-frequency communication devices, detailed topographic maps, and trail marking systems to prevent overlapping search routes. Starting at 5:30 a.m., teams began sweeping trail sections where Evan was last seen. In the first 2 miles, tracking teams recorded footprints matching the type of SAR boots Evan wore, a consistent series of even steps heading toward Cascade Falls. However, upon reaching the turn into the narrow forest branch Evan had entered the previous afternoon, the footprints began mixing with animal tracks, making differentiation difficult. The K9 unit entered the area at 7:10 a.m. and initially picked up scent on the dry leaf litter right beside the stream edge. The dogs led the search team deeper into the forest, crossing a slippery wet slope, but suddenly lost the scent entirely in an area of extremely dense canopy where wind could not circulate, a feature that prevents scent from traveling far and frequently challenges scent tracking units. While the K9 team rotated to refresh scent detection, another team discovered crude evidence approximately 200 meters away, an 18 centimeters length of yellow paracord with ends cleanly cut by a sharp tool, not naturally frayed. Near that location, boot prints in soft mud showed a larger size than Evan's footwear, deeper impressions, and direction opposite to his movement, suggesting at least one other person had passed through the area after Evan left the team. An approximately 2-square-meter patch of ground near a cluster of young pines was also unusually flattened, with decayed leaves flipped and compressed in a manner not consistent with single footprints, but rather as if a heavy object had been placed there briefly. Search teams flagged the area with colored markers and sent coordinates to command for treatment as a special observation point. Throughout the afternoon, the operation expanded to the western slopes, an area with hazardous terrain featuring numerous deep crevices and loose rock. Radio systems recorded several dead zones, especially along small gullies beside Cascade Creek and narrow valleys where steep terrain completely blocked signals. Nevertheless, no personal items belonging to Evan, such as hat, gloves, radio, or any gear typically dropped in an emergency, were found. By late afternoon, the observation helicopter flew low sweeps, but detected no heat signatures consistent with a living person or body. As the sun set and strong winds returned, the operation was forced to suspend at 8 p.m. to ensure searcher safety. At the end of the first day, only crude evidence, paracord, unknown boot prints, and the compressed patch was documented, with no direct clues about Evan Kearns' presence or next direction of travel, leaving the entire operation temporarily deadlocked. Right after the initial search effort concluded, without direct traces of Evan Kearns, the investigative branch of Rocky Mountain National Park conducted a preliminary assessment of all evidence collected on June 7, 2015, to determine whether Evan's disappearance aligned with a typical wilderness accident or showed anomalous signs warranting expanded investigation. The first step was cross-referencing the yellow paracord with standard SR team gear per the issued equipment list. Every volunteer was provided with 550 paracord in red or black for marking anchor points and directing routes. No yellow paracord was listed in the official inventory, and no such item was documented in Evan's backpack. The cleanly cut ends indicated a sharp tool rather than tearing from friction, raising suspicion that it did not belong to the team and was likely brought into the area by someone else. Meanwhile, the ground track analysis team focused on comparing the unknown boot prints found near the paracord. Crime scene photos and rubber casts were sent to the Grand County Track Identification Unit. The size of the prints in the mud indicated boot size 11 to 12, larger than Evan's 9.5. The sole pattern featured alternating triangular chevron lugs, consistent with tactical-style boots, rather than the lighter Serrar footwear used by the rescue team. Wear patterns and impression depth suggested the wearer was significantly heavier than Evan or carrying a heavy load. Analysis of the footprint edge angles showed occasional abrupt direction changes, indicating controlled movement rather than stumbling or panicked running. With this evidence, investigators began evaluating accident scenarios. They surveyed the terrain around the Cascade Creek branch, where Evan was last believed to have entered, comparing it to common wilderness accidents, slipping down wet rock slopes, falling into crevices, or being swept into the stream during high water. However, no long skid marks, fall scars, or freshly displaced loose rock, signs nearly always present in mountain falls, were found. Higher steep sections, checked with pole-mounted cameras, showed no gear fragments or drag marks. The park's geology team determined the area had mostly low ledges with maximum drop heights of about 3–4 meters, insufficient force to cause a complete disappearance of an adult without leaving traces. The possibility of Evan falling into the water was closely examined. Cascade Creek runs strong in early summer, but the stream bed is shallow, with many sections only knee-deep. If Evan had slipped in, clothing or gear would almost certainly have snagged on rocks or low branches along the banks. The complete absence of any personal items made a natural accident scenario rated as low probability. Rangers then assessed the possibility of animal attack. Rocky Mountain National Park hosts black bears, mountain lions, and elk, 3 species capable of endangering humans. However, the scene showed no typical signs of animal attack: no fur, no claw marks, no torn-up ground, or bite marks on trees. Canine units also detected no characteristic death by animal odor, which would be present when blood or tissue is dragged. Additionally, predators usually leave clear drag tracks when moving a victim, but the discovered compressed patch did not match such activity. Instead, it was flat and undisturbed. After compiling all data from the first 2 days, the investigation team concluded that the elements did not match a typical lost hiker case. No signs of panic, no scattered personal items, no evidence of attempts to return to the main trail, and the presence of at least one non-SAR individual's footprints near Evan's last known location. Sudden bad weather could temporarily disrupt communication, but it did not explain the complete disappearance of all traces of Evan within a narrow area in just minutes. Following an emergency meeting at 6 p.m. on June 8, 2015, the SR commander and ranger representatives agreed to upgrade the case from lost hiker to suspicious disappearance, as the existing evidence did not fit any natural accident, disorientation, or animal attack scenario. The new protocol required strict preservation of evidence discovery areas, suspension of broad area searching to avoid contaminating tracks, and transfer of all data to the park's specialized investigative team for in-depth analysis of anomalous factors related to Evan Kearns' disappearance. From the time the case was classified as suspicious disappearance, park rangers and the Special Investigation Team of Rocky Mountain National Park continued passive monitoring of the North Inlet Trail area for years, but gathered no further direct traces related to Evan. Everything seemed to reach a dead end until, beginning in September 2016, new anomalous phenomena started appearing, scattered, difficult to explain, but similar enough to be noted in the park's internal reports. The first case involved a 34-year-old man from Fort Collins who went missing while hiking alone in the late afternoon on the Tonahudu Creek Trail, about 8 miles from Evan's last known location. The victim left the trailhead at 4:20 p.m. and was expected back before dark, but never returned. About 2 miles into the dense forest from the last GPS signal, search teams found a short length of cut yellow paracord with no other personal items. 1 year later, in July 2017, a 29-year-old woman from Denver was reported missing while trail running in the southern Grand Lake area, only about 5 miles as the crow flies from North Inlet. She separated from her running group at 5 p.m. to return to the parking lot for her jacket, but then lost contact. Search teams found large-size boot prints in soft soil near a narrow bend in the trail, with a sole pattern matching the one in Evan's file, though time had reduced clarity. Additionally, a 10 centimeters length of yellow paracord was found caught on low brush, its ends cleanly cut by a sharp tool, similar to the 2016 case. Both pieces of evidence lacked useful DNA due to rain washout. In June 2019, a 22-year-old solo backpacker in the upper Tonahudu area also vanished around 6 p.m. This time, search forces found a flattened, compressed patch similar to the description in Evan's file, decayed leaves, flipped but no tearing, suggesting brief placement of a heavy object. A single large boot print appeared 50 meters away, though not clear enough for sole pattern comparison. Its depth and orientation matched the previous 2 cases. The fourth and most attention-grabbing case occurred in August 2021, when a landscape photographer from New Mexico disappeared while shooting sunset near Granite Falls. He was last seen at 7:10 p.m. A passing witness described him lingering unusually long at the junction between pine forest and a side trail. When search teams arrived, they recorded a short length of cut yellow paracord beside a pine tree base, nearby a patch of crushed dry leaves, and no signs of scattered gear. Apart from the yellow paracord color, the scene left virtually no trace of the victim, mirroring the silent disappearance pattern seen in Evan's case. Across the 4 disappearances spanning 2016-2021, investigators began noticing striking similarities. All victims vanished in late afternoon or near dusk. On lightly traveled trail sections, each had separated from a group or was solo, and every scene lacked the chaotic traces typical of accidents. Yellow paracord appeared in 3 of the 4 cases, always neatly cut and left as a discarded fragment. Large boot prints were clearly present in 2 cases and faintly suggestive in 1. Additionally, the flattened, compressed ground pattern recurred at 2 scenes, forming a kind of deliberate behavioral signature. In 2021, after the New Mexico photographer case was reported to the Department of the Interior, federal investigators working with rangers began stringing together all missing persons files in the area and creating a comparative catalog. When Evan Kearns' file was reintroduced as the foundational case, they realized it matched almost perfectly with the structure of the newer disappearances: loss of contact in late afternoon, vanishing on quiet trail segments, no left-behind personal items, appearance of anomalous yellow paracord, and footprints of another individual at the point of disappearance. The data chain was temporarily named the North Inlet Pattern, a distinctive disappearance pattern within a 12-mile radius around North Inlet and Grand Lake, encompassing 5 victims, including Evan. From this point, Evan's file was fully revived, no longer treated as an isolated incident, but as the first piece in a multi-year chain of disappearances, laying the groundwork for expanded analysis of the possible anonymous perpetrator behind the entire pattern. On the evening of October 14, 2022, 7 years after Evan Kearns' disappearance, and only 2 months after the North Inlet pattern model was established, the Granby Town Police Department received a call from a resident living in the Creekside Village area, reporting that a man who looked like he had been lost for many days was standing motionless next to the neighborhood's shared dumpster. He appeared unsteady, with disheveled clothing, and kept looking around as if he didn't know where he was. The caller described the man's height, hair color, and apparent age as strikingly matching the last published images of Evan from the 2015 missing person file. At 8:41 p.m., a community security guard approached from a distance and radioed that the individual showed no response when called, carried no phone or wallet, and was clutching tightly to a thin, nearly completely torn jacket with the sleeves mostly ripped off. Following safety approach protocols for potentially returning missing persons in a disoriented state, the guard maintained a distance of 5-7 meters, pointed the flashlight at the ground to avoid startling him, and requested assistance from local police. 2 officers arrived at 8:55 p.m. and conducted an initial assessment: no visible weapons, no dangerous objects in sleeves or pockets, the individual standing still with no aggressive behavior. When they approached within about 2 meters, the man slowly raised his head, blinked rapidly, as if pained by the light, and did not respond when asked his name. One officer noted in the report that the man looked as though he had just gone through many days of sleep deprivation or had escaped an environment completely devoid of natural light, evidenced by his strong reaction to the flashlight. External conditions showed he had become extremely thin compared to Evan's 2015 reference photo: deeply sunken cheeks, dark circles under the eyes, tangled hair grown almost to the shoulders, patchy beard, worn and torn travel khaki pants, shoeless feet covered in a layer of pale gray mud, distinctly different from the usual soil in the residential area. The skin on both hands was cracked, with thick calluses and patches, especially over the thumbs and the base of the index fingers, callus patterns typical of prolonged twisting or gripping of hard objects. Despite his exhausted appearance, the man had no open wounds and showed no visible bleeding. When police asked if he was in pain anywhere, he only shook his head weakly, with shallow breathing, unsteady stance, and several near falls if not leaning against the wooden wall behind him. Recognizing that the individual might be in a state of acute neurological disorientation, officers did not immediately place him in the patrol car. Instead, they followed minimal contact de-escalation procedures, speaking slowly, maintaining a fixed distance, and asking him to sit on the wooden step next to the dumpster to prevent falling. He complied, but his eyes continued to scan the area, as if trying to identify something unclear, occasionally muttering disjointed syllables that did not form complete sentences. Within a few minutes, an ambulance from the Granby Medical Center arrived, using yellow lights instead of red to minimize light stimulation. Medical personnel performed a rapid assessment, weak but stable pulse, no violent reactions, subnormal body temperature, moderate dehydration, and mild shock. They placed him on a soft stretcher, covered him with a thermal blanket, and loaded him into the ambulance, while police prepared the intake report, recording the time, initial condition, and objective description, without assigning any identity assumptions. The internal report noted that the individual was highly likely to have been wandering for an extended period under conditions of light deprivation and malnutrition based on hand-skin condition, pupillary response, and posture. When the ambulance left the scene at 9:18 p.m., police examined the area around where the man had appeared. No drag marks, no personal items left behind, no suspicious vehicles or tire tracks nearby. One resident reported hearing a faint metallic sound around 8:20 p.m., like the trash gate being lightly pushed, but saw no one. Pursuant to Colorado protocols for long-term missing persons who may return suddenly, the medical center temporarily filed the case under the code Unknown Adult Male Found and initiated intake procedures for disoriented individuals, including basic physical examination, consciousness assessment, initial identification photographs, and full documentation without concluding identity until separate legal processes were completed. Staff noted that the man did not resist, but would not answer basic questions such as name, age, or residence. Each time he was asked, he frowned as if trying to remember, then shook his head, as though unable to find the words. Although no official confirmation had been made yet, the fact that a man whose appearance closely matched Evan had appeared in a neighborhood more than 40 miles from Rocky Mountain National Park was quickly reported internally up the federal chain, opening the possibility that this was a long-term missing person return case. Immediately after the man was admitted to the Granby Medical Center in a state of disorientation, Colorado's standard identity verification procedure for unknown adult male found cases was activated and conducted in parallel with basic medical care. The first step was fingerprint collection via LevScan. The data was sent to state databases and the federal NCIC system. Results returned after 22 minutes showed a 100% match with Evan Kearns' fingerprints on file from his 2013 National Park Service SR volunteer registration. Upon receiving the match report, the identification team proceeded to the second step, facial feature comparison, using FRP technology based on Evan's pre-2015 photographs, focusing on jaw structure, brow arch curvature, and the location of a small mole on the left cheek. Despite the man's severely emaciated and angular facial changes, the system confirmed a biometric similarity of 92%, sufficient to be considered a strong match. Next, the medical center contacted Evan's family dentist, as listed in the original SR file, to obtain copies of old dental records. Comparison of X-rays revealed two key identifying features: a composite filling on the inner surface of the upper right molar, and a slight crowding in the lower incisor group, that matched the man brought to the emergency room. With both fingerprints and dental records aligning, a buccal swab DNA sample was collected for comparison with DNA retained from Evan's personal items in 2015. While DNA results would take longer, the match of the two primary biometric modalities was sufficient for authorities to proceed with family notification. At 11:08 a.m. on October 15, 2022, The case officer called the Kearns family in Fort Collins. Evan's mother was invited to the medical center for in-person visual confirmation. Upon seeing her son in the observation room, she confirmed with her own eyes that this was indeed Evan Kearns, despite the severe change in appearance. After family confirmation, the hospital and Granby Police Department prepared the official identity certification report and formally closed the unknown adult case code, reclassifying it as Evan Kearns, located alive. Immediately afterward, the National Park Service restored the full 2015 missing person file from inactive to active survivor case status, meaning Evan's case was no longer classified as an unsolved disappearance but shifted to a living survivor file, allowing authorities to reopen the entire chain of documents, scene diagrams, and original evidence for investigation into the cause of disappearance and prolonged absence. That same afternoon, authorities issued a decision establishing Evan Kearns' full legal status as a victim in a suspected criminal matter, while appointing legal counsel to protect his interests, given his current inability to communicate. The investigating agency also established an expanded investigative scope, including re-examination of the area where Evan appeared, collection of traffic and residential camera data to determine his route to Creekside Village, and initiation of federal coordination procedures since the case involved a national park. All steps were recorded in the recovery file, marking the valid verification of Evan's identity and officially transitioning the 7-year-old disappearance case into the cause of incident investigation phase as a criminal matter involving a living victim. Immediately after Evan Kearns' identity was officially confirmed, the Granby Medical Center transferred him to the Specialized Examination Unit, following protocols for long-term missing persons, in coordination with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Medical Team, to comprehensively assess all signs related to possible prolonged captivity, abuse, or exploitation over multiple years. The first step of the examination was full-body forensic photographic documentation and soft tissue measurement of physical injury. On both of Evan's wrists, doctors discovered crescent-shaped brownish discoloration bands extending from the base of the hands to mid-forearm, with similar indentations on both sides, consistent with old ligature marks from prolonged rope or cord binding. The marks had healed, but left thick callus layers, indicating repeated friction over months or years, rather than a short-term incident. Similar but lighter markings were found around the ankles, suggesting the feet had been restrained only intermittently rather than continuously. Soft tissue structural evaluation revealed marked muscle atrophy, significant wasting of the quadriceps and calf muscles, with muscle mass loss exceeding typical levels for long-distance hikers or those experiencing acute malnutrition. This degree of degeneration is commonly associated with prolonged movement restriction or confinement in spaces too small to allow full standing and stretching. Brain MRI showed 2 areas of mild edema and signals indicative of old cranial trauma occurring at least several years prior, possibly from blows or severe impacts. Small neural scar tissue in the frontal lobe suggested effects on spatial orientation, consistent with the disorientation observed when Evan was found. Blood tests revealed severely low vitamin D levels, along with deficiencies in vitamins B1 and B6, micronutrients that rarely drop so profoundly unless the individual has lived in prolonged absence of natural light with a controlled or inadequate diet. Blood copper and zinc levels were also abnormal, reflecting repeated exposure to environments containing fine metallic mineral dust or air contaminated by mechanical equipment. Hair sample analysis, commonly used to determine long-term environmental exposure because hair retains mineral traces month by month, showed the following when compared from root to tip. High concentrations of gray mineral dust containing silica and feldspar components typical of mine shafts, artificial trenches, or metal facilities built with old concrete. Fine heavy metal particles, primarily oxidized iron and zinc, were deeply embedded in the keratin layer, indicating a continuous source of metal emission in a confined, poorly ventilated environment. Notably, In the hair segment, corresponding to the most recent approximately 3 years, there was a sudden sharp increase in light industrial machine oil, a type commonly used for small engines or old mechanical ventilation fans. During bronchoscopy performed by the pulmonologist, a fine gray dust layer was observed adhering to the respiratory tract walls, not the type of dust typical of urban or mountainous environments. Laboratory analysis revealed a mixture of micro-ash particles combined with partially combusted hydrocarbon oil compounds, traces almost characteristic of long-running unmaintained old box fan industrial ventilation systems. This allowed the inference that Evan had been in a sealed environment with forced ventilation rather than natural airflow, and that this fan was likely located in an underground room or windowless structure. Combined muscle damage and respiratory dust composition indicated that the victim was not only confined but also breathing recirculated air through old filters, a feature rare except in carefully concealed holding environments with no external venting. Further analysis of fingernail samples and shed skin layers revealed traces of chlorine-based compounds and industrial lubricants, substances commonly used in metal spaces to prevent rust. This reinforced the hypothesis that the entire holding area was constructed of metal or thin steel, possibly a container, mechanical vault, or narrow modified chamber. Synthesizing all medical findings, the forensic team estimated the duration Evan must have spent in conditions of light deprivation, severely restricted movement, and exposure to fine metallic dust. Based on accumulated keratin in hair, blood micronutrient indices, and degree of muscle degeneration, they estimated that Evan had been in a sealed, light-deprived environment for at least 52 months, more than 4 years. These data completely ruled out the possibility of him living outdoors or in temporary shelter. The injury pattern was uniquely consistent with continuous confinement in a controlled environment with extremely limited movement. Additionally, the uniformity of wrist and ankle marks indicated periodic limb restraint, possibly for hours each day or at specific times to prevent mobility. When lung capacity was measured, doctors found significant reduction, consistent with inhalation of fine dust in substandard air quality conditions. Consultation among specialists across multiple fields produced a preliminary conclusion that Evan had not merely gone missing, but had undergone a period of controlled movement restriction, lack of natural light exposure, long-term inhalation of air contaminated by mechanical equipment, and likely confinement in a sealed metal structure. This combination of injuries could not have been self-inflicted and was inconsistent with any long-term outdoor accident. After completing a 47-page report, the forensic team transferred all documentation to the investigating agency as evidence establishing that Evan Kearns' period of disappearance bore the characteristics of systematic, prolonged forced confinement over multiple years, with physical and biological evidence proving a minimum duration of more than 4 years in a fully controlled environment. Immediately after the forensic report concluded that Evan had undergone prolonged confinement in a sealed environment, the Special Investigation Team, in collaboration with CBI forensic psychologists, conducted a series of sessions aimed at reconstructing the fragmented memories Evan might still retain, even in very vague or non-linear form. In the initial phase, Evan was unable to describe clear visual images, but recalled disjointed sensory impressions, particularly sounds, background vibrations, and abnormal light-dark cycles. Specialists asked him to record every smallest detail, regardless of logic, focusing solely on accurate sensory description. After 3 consecutive sessions, they compiled a cluster of sound-related memories: a sharp metallic clank, a hollow impact, sound like something hard striking steel surfaces, a prolonged high-pitched squeak like an unlubricated hinge, and a strong, regular mechanical noise repeating in cycles, resembling a motor fan or industrial ventilation system. Evan repeatedly mentioned the sensation of slight floor vibration at certain times of day, especially when lying still, or when the entire space suddenly became completely quiet. This led investigators to hypothesize that the place of confinement might be near a motor, compressor, or infrastructure equipment operating on a fixed cycle. When asked about light, Evan described never seeing natural light during the entire period of captivity. Instead, there were sudden bursts of white light turning on at fixed times and then off, sometimes lasting 10-15 minutes, sometimes only a few seconds. The light never changed direction or flickered, indicating a fixed source positioned on the ceiling or high corner. Each time the light came on, Evan clearly recalled a mechanical click of a switch, along with a light vibration spreading through the metal walls. These characteristics were consistent with an environment using mechanical timers or lighting systems integrated with ventilation fans. Among the fragmented memories, one of the most significant details was Evan's repeated mention of a sound like metal being dragged, but from a distance, sometimes accompanied by heavy footsteps with prolonged echoes. He never saw anyone, but the sound had strong directional quality. The footsteps seemed to travel along a narrow corridor with hard surfaces and acoustic resonance. As months passed, this memory recurred in his pathological recollections, indicating a high likelihood that it was a frequent signal in the confinement environment. The sound analysis team later categorized all of Evan's descriptions into three main groups: cyclic sounds, irregular signals, and ambient sounds. When combined with forensic data, especially metallic dust, machine oil, and prolonged light deprivation, the experts reconstructed an overall picture of the place where Evan had been held. A sealed metal or steel chamber placed inside a larger structure, windowless, ventilated by forced fans. The sound characteristics also suggested at least two layers of metal, the inner confinement chamber and an outer corridor. Evan's description of footsteps as heavy and long echoing led investigators to speculate that the corridor had a low ceiling but was long, creating resonance effects. They also noted that Evan recalled no smells of wood, earth, or natural mildew, instead cold smell, iron smell, and oil smell, consistent with microscopic analysis from hair and respiration. Regarding background vibration, Evan described three major vibration events every 24 hours, lasting about 10-20 seconds each, followed by absolute silence, and then a strong ventilation fan cycle. Based on this frequency, experts considered it highly likely that the confinement location was near a pumping system, compressor, or industrial equipment operating on a scheduled cycle. This ruled out confinement in tents, wooden cabins, or natural rock caves, as those locations would not produce regular mechanical vibrations. Another key finding came from temperature memories. Evan recalled constant cold that did not vary between day and night, consistent with an uninsulated steel chamber or one located underground. Combining these signals, the investigation team constructed a characteristic environmental model: a small metal room, metal floor, timed artificial lighting, box-type industrial ventilation fan, no natural airflow, located near cyclically operating mechanical equipment, and situated within a larger structure containing corridors or technical areas. When compared with infrastructure facilities within a 30-mile radius of where Evan appeared, several types of structures emerged as potential candidates: maintenance sheds, industrial containers, old technical stations, equipment vaults, or underground generator repair areas. However, investigators did not reach a conclusion at this stage. Instead, they continued asking Evan to repeat recurring sensory memories. During the sessions, the psychologist noted Evan had very clear cyclic memories of 3 light periods per day, consistent with confinement in a completely sealed room where artificial light was the only time signal available to him. This cycle, 10-15 minutes on, completely off, then on again, resonated with the background vibration rhythm and ventilation fan noise to define an environment operating on a fixed schedule. At the end of the initial analysis phase, the investigation team integrated 3 sources: Evan's sensory descriptions, the sound and light memories he recalled, and forensic data from hair, blood, and soft tissue samples. All pointed to a consistent pattern: The place of confinement was a sealed metal space near a mechanical vibration source, with forced ventilation from old industrial fans, timer-controlled lighting, and no natural contact with the outside environment. This was a crucial conclusion that helped narrow the search for hidden infrastructure traces in the surrounding area, while establishing that Evan's fragmented memories, though lacking visual detail, remained a key data source for reconstructing the confinement space where he had been held for many years. While the investigation team was analyzing Evan's fragmented memories to reconstruct the confinement environment, new information emerged that changed the overall urgency level of the entire case. On October 9, 2022, just 5 days before Evan was found at the Creekside Village residential area, another missing person report was filed at the Bowen Baker Trailhead area, approximately 11 miles as the crow flies from the point where Evan described the familiar background hum and mechanical sounds. The victim was a 31-year-old physical education teacher from Boulder who frequently ran trails alone on weekends. According to friends, he left his car at 4:45 p.m. to do a short run before dark. Parking lot cameras captured him entering the trail, carrying a small backpack and showing no signs of abnormality. However, he never returned, and no messages were sent after 5:10 p.m., even though his phone still had battery life. When his family reported him missing that same evening, a search was launched the following morning, but found no personal items except for a neatly cut 12 centimeters length of yellow paracord lying on a mound of earth about 300 meters off the main trail. The on-scene report noted that this piece of paracord was identical in appearance to samples that had appeared in 3 previous missing persons cases before 2021, matching the color, thickness, and cut style of the cord segment found in Evan's 2015 file. The most striking detail was that the timing of this man's disappearance closely aligned with the clearest memory Evan had just described during his psychological interview on October 13th. He recalled very heavy footsteps and a fan humming 3 times in succession right before he was taken to the residential area and left near the dumpster. Experts noted an alarming correspondence between this description and the timing of the new victim's disappearance, around 5 p.m. on October 9th, marked the beginning of twilight, consistent with the time period when the perpetrator, in previous cases, typically chose to approach solitary individuals on narrow trail sections. When overlaying topographic maps, the investigation team realized that the Bowen Baker Trail not only fell within the 12-mile radius of the North Inlet pattern, but also lay directly within the corridor from which the sounds Evan described, background hum, dragging metal, and ventilation fan noise, could plausibly originate if a sealed metal facility were located on the northern mountainside. The fact that a new disappearance occurred right before Evan reappeared suggested 2 things. First, the perpetrator's sequence of actions had not been interrupted at all over the past 7 years. Second, the timing of Evan's release coincided with the moment the perpetrator may have shifted to a new victim, a pattern previously observed in behavioral analyses of long-term captors. When cross-referencing the 4 old disappearances with this latest one, the time, location, circumstance pattern matched in a deeply disturbing way. All victims vanished in the late afternoon. All were alone on low-traffic trail segments, all left behind no dropped belongings, and all were associated with cut yellow paracord. Furthermore, the large boot prints previously documented in Evan's file also appeared faintly at the Bowen Baker scene, though not clear enough to extract tread patterns, yet showing the same direction of travel recorded in the 2017 and 2019 disappearances. From this data, the investigation team began forming a new logical connection. The perpetrator may have been maintaining a highly repetitive victim selection cycle, always targeting solitary individuals near twilight, always approaching at the junction between the main trail and a secondary forested branch, then transporting the victim to a sealed location before erasing traces. Evan's description of heavy echoing footsteps right before being removed from the holding site, occurring almost simultaneously with the new victim's disappearance, led the team to suspect that the perpetrator may have been performing a victim exchange, releasing one person while bringing in another, according to a fixed schedule that precisely reflected the vibration and light cycles in Evan's memories. This discovery elevated the investigation to the highest level of urgency. The chain of disappearances was not only continuing, but demonstrated a stable multi-year operational pattern by the perpetrator, who may have maintained a sufficiently concealed holding facility to hide victims for 7 years without detection. As soon as the Bowen, Baker Trail disappearance formed the newest link in the North Inlet pattern chain, the federal investigation team expanded analysis into the fields of geology, engineering, and acoustics to narrow down the possible location of the confinement bunker somewhere within the northern Rocky Mountains near Grand Lake. The first step focused on Evan's shoes, which were collected immediately upon his admission to the Granby Medical Center. The shoe soles showed an uneven coating of pale gray mud mixed with fine mineral dust and tiny triangular grit, particle types characteristically originating from weathered metamorphic rock in a sealed, humid environment. This soil type is not commonly found around open trails in Rocky Mountain National Park, where forest soil tends to be reddish-brown due to high iron and organic content. Instead, the mineral spectrum obtained from the mud sample on Evan's shoes revealed a high presence of white feldspar, mica flakes, and needle-shaped quartz. When compared with the geologic map of the Front Range, the forensic geology team determined it strongly matched soil found in abandoned mine tunnels from the 1930s, 1950s in the area north of Grand Lake, and extending toward the slopes near Bowen, Baker. Notably, the mica flake content and needle-like quartz structure aligned closely with two former pegmatite mines, rock types rich in quartz and feldspar, that had been closed for nearly 70 years. Based on this match, the investigation team reviewed historical records of more than 19 abandoned mine tunnels within a 15-mile radius. Of these, only 4 tunnels shared similar elevation and geology with the sample from Evan's shoes, but 2 had completely collapsed years earlier. This left only 2 candidates, Northridge No. 3 and Hardscrabble Adit, both part of low-grade metal mining systems with deep tunnels, hundreds of meters long, and steel-reinforced rock walls. Concurrently with the soil analysis, the forensic engineering team examined dust samples recovered from Evan's respiratory tract. Results showed a mixture of micro-ash dust with 3 main components: worn metal particles from steel surfaces, compressor oil, ISO 32 grade, and partially combusted hydrocarbons. This type of compressor oil was commonly used in older air compressors, particularly forced ventilation systems in mines before abandonment. Notably, ISO 32 oil now exists primarily in outdated industrial structures that have not been upgraded or in illegally maintained retrofitted equipment. The fact that Evan had inhaled large quantities of dust containing this component proved that the ventilation fan in the holding site was not only operational, but ran regularly in cycles, consistent with his memory of a steady background hum. Additionally, the presence of highly oxidized iron metal particles indicated an internal steel structure that had not been maintained, causing continuous surface dust fallout when the fan ran at full power. Combining the geologic and ventilation data, the investigation team narrowed the target set to locations with a history of small-capacity compressor fan installations in mine tunnels, especially shallow metal-lined tunnels without direct external ventilation openings. Colorado Bureau of Mines reports from the 1950s indicated that this type of fan system had been installed in 3 tunnels north of Grand Lake, but only 2 retained potentially intact structural elements, Northridge No. 3 and Hardscrabble Adit, exactly matching the results from Evan's shoe sole soil sample. Next, the lighting engineering team focused on Evan's description of artificial light cycles. Based on his account of on-board mechanical lighting without flickering or natural light interference, experts determined the most likely fit was old fluorescent tube lights with magnetic ballasts or low-power LED fixtures on timers. The light quality Evan described, not glaring but cold, best matched industrial 4100K tube lights commonly used in technical storage or small tunnels. To determine the direction of illumination, they had Evan sit in a simulated confined space chamber constructed at the Psychological Investigation Center. When simulating overhead light from a single-point source, Evan immediately reacted to strong light coming from the upper right position, indicating that in his memory, the fixed light source had always come from one consistent direction and had not changed over many years. Using this characteristic, the lighting engineering team employed simulation software to model a metal space approximately 2 by 3 meters with a low ceiling of 1.9, 2.1 meters, and the light fixture positioned at the edge of the wall rather than the center of the ceiling, creating the characteristic offset illumination zone Evan remembered. Using this data, the investigation team cross-referenced the original blueprints of the 2 suspect tunnels. 3 contained a small auxiliary chamber, formerly used as an equipment storage room, with dimensions nearly identical to the 2.3 mm model, thin steel wall panels over rock, and a ventilation port leading to the old compressor chamber. In contrast, hardscrabble added had a larger technical chamber, but lacked surrounding metal construction. This made Northridge No. 3 a significantly stronger candidate for the environment Evan described, and the dust sample recovered. Advanced analysis then focused on the background vibration. Evan remembered 3 strong vibration cycles every 24 hours, compatible with an automatic air compressor maintaining stable pressure in an old ventilation system. Engineers reconstructed the operation of 1940s, 1950s compressors based on technical records. This type typically cycled on every 6-8 hours, closely matching Evan's description. Notably, Northridge No. 3 was documented as having used exactly this type of compressor to draw air from the tunnel into the ventilation duct, whereas hardscrabble adit used a manual air pipe system without a compressor. Acoustic simulation software showed that background vibration at Northridge No. 3, if the compressor were still running, would propagate through the metal walls as a perceptible gentle vibration inside a sealed room, precisely as Evan described. In the final step, the geology engineering team created a composite map incorporating 12 data sources: shoe sole soil sample, hair mineral content, ventilation dust, mechanical sounds, cyclic vibration, lighting structure, cell dimensions, fan direction, compressor oil composition, locations of the 2 old mines, technical drawings, and operational history. Each data point was weighted to determine compatibility with the 2 tunnels. The results were unanimous. Northridge No. 3 scored 84% compatibility, hardscrabble adit scored only 37%. This figure strongly supported the hypothesis that Evan's confinement chamber was most likely located within a metal structure built inside Northridge No. 3. A site abandoned for decades, but still accessible if someone had secretly reinforced it from the inside. When combined with the recent Bowen Baker disappearance, the investigation team officially designated Northridge No. 3 as the primary target location, marking the first step in shifting the case from analysis to targeted field approach. Immediately after Northridge No. 3 was identified as the highest probability site containing Evan's confinement chamber, the federal investigation team coordinated with the U.S. Forest Service and the Grand County Tactical Response Team to execute a field approach plan, following strict safety protocols, as abandoned mine tunnels often present risks of wall collapse, toxic gases, or man-made mechanical traps. At 6:20 a.m. on October 18, 2022, the geology engineering team established a control station about 200 meters from the tunnel entrance, deploying sensors to monitor oxygen, CO2 thys, and methane levels. After 15 minutes of testing, the atmosphere met standards for controlled entry. The entry team, consisting of 3 geology technicians, 2 federal investigators, and 1 forensic specialist, proceeded into the main tunnel, which was reinforced with old steel beams. Northridge No. 3 featured a nearly 60-meter main corridor before splitting into 2 branches, the left leading to a former tool storage area, the right to a technical room. As they advanced deeper, investigators noticed several anomalies. Wall dust was not as thick as typically found in long abandoned tunnels. Some steel wall sections showed fresh grinding marks, and the floor displayed faint drag marks consistent with heavy metal objects being pulled across. At the end of the main corridor, the team discovered a dark gray metal door with relatively new hinges, completely unlike the aged structure of the rest of the tunnel, indicating it had been installed within the past few years. Beneath the door's lower edge was a small gap revealing fine gray dust, exactly the type containing compressor oil previously found in Evan's hair and lungs. The engineering team inserted a probe camera through the gap and confirmed no mechanical traps or hazardous obstructions inside. Upon opening the door, a rectangular chamber appeared with dimensions nearly identical to the 2x3 model reconstructed by the lighting engineering team from Evan's memory. The walls, ceiling, and floor were lined with thin interlocking steel panels. In the upper right corner was a fluorescent tube fixture with a mechanical ballast. Electrical wiring ran along the wall edge and passed through a hole to the rear, consistent with Evan's description of the click sound and cold scheduled lighting. The metal floor showed unusual wear in two symmetrical spots, where large boot marks had left shallow scratches indicating frequent weight shifting from one foot to the other. Near the left wall, examiners found a black fabric glove dropped beneath a metal shelf. The glove's surface bore dried sweat residue, mineral dust, and a short brown hair. The hair was collected using forensic tape to prevent cross-contamination. On the floor, about 40 centimeters from the steel wall, the team discovered a 35 centimeters length of silver-gray nylon cord, showing signs of prolonged tension. Under microscopic examination, the cord surface exhibited fine groove abrasion matching the calluses on Evan's wrists, indicating a binding or restraint mechanism had been used in this space. The ventilation system was located high on the wall, opposite the entrance, consisting of an old compressor fan unit mounted directly onto an air duct. Exactly the component type described in Evan's respiratory forensic report. Oil residue caked around the fan blades indicated recent operation, as the oil had not fully dried and still emitted a faint hydrocarbon odor. Investigators used specialized swabs to collect dust from the vent grill. On-site rapid analysis confirmed a composition of micro-ash dust and highly oxidized iron particles, matching Evan's tracheal sample with near-perfect correspondence. Beneath the fluorescent tube, the rear steel wall displayed large arc-shaped scratches with a rough surface and brighter metal exposed where rust had been scraped away. Examiners determined these were marks from hard metal abrasion, likely from binding cables or restraint hardware, being repeatedly pulled up and down over a long period. Additionally, in the left corner of the room, the team found a rectangular stain outline on the wall, the size of a small wooden panel that had once been mounted and later removed. The stain had dark dust borders, indicating an object had hung there for many years. A few centimeters away was a round drilled hole leading into the void behind, where electrical wiring ran horizontally. The corridor outside the chamber also showed notable features. Hardened floor soil bore drag marks, nearly 3 meters long, consistent with Evan's memory of dragging metal sounds. In a corridor corner, the team found a small 3 mm thick steel fragment broken from a panel, with color and wear matching the material inside the confinement room, confirming recent disassembly. When the investigation team compared all these features with the memory model constructed from Evan's descriptions, including background vibration, long echoing footsteps, scheduled lighting, industrial ventilation fan, sealed metal room, and spatial dimensions, they matched with such high accuracy that there remained no doubt the steel chamber inside Northridge, number 3, was the place where he had been held for many years. The collected evidence: glove with biological material, worn restraint cord, matching ventilation dust, metal abrasion marks, reflecting forced movement, was sufficient to conclude that this room was not an old abandoned storage, but had been deliberately modified to confine a person for an extended period. Based on all data, the investigation team officially classified Northridge No. 3 as the primary site, the main confinement location, and prepared preservation documentation for the entire area to support ongoing forensic analysis and further investigation. After Northridge No. 3 was identified as the primary site and the on-site evidence matched Evan's confinement pattern completely, the investigative team moved into the offender profiling phase using a combination of behavioral analysis and geographic profiling to determine the personal characteristics, technical capabilities, and range of movement of the individual who had maintained the bunker for many years. The first step was behavioral analysis across all 5 missing persons cases from 2015 to 2022. In every case, the victims disappeared during late afternoon conditions when natural light begins to fade, and all were alone on remote, little-traffic trail segments. The locations of their disappearances were typically at side branches or junctions between main trails and smaller paths, places where a stalker could observe from above or from a distance without being detected. This indicates the offender actively selected optimal times and locations to minimize the chance of being seen, only approaching once the victim had been away from populated areas for a few minutes. In all 5 cases, there were no signs of struggle at the scene, no scattered belongings, no fleeing footprints, or long drag marks, demonstrating that the approach was rapid, precise, and completely surprising. This pattern fits an offender capable of surveilling victims from a distance over extended periods, recognizing moments when they separated from groups or went alone, then closing in via familiar forest paths or shortcuts. The selection of victims with varied ages and physical conditions shows the offender did not choose targets based on physiological characteristics, but on environmental conditions. Attacks occurred only when the factors of isolation, late afternoon, favorable terrain converged. Investigators assess this as classic behavior of someone with deep knowledge of the terrain, trails, weather, and hiker habits in the area. Next, the technical profiling team examined the offender's specialized characteristics through the bunker's structure and operational equipment. The fact that this individual was able to build, reinforce, and maintain a metal confinement chamber inside Northridge No. 3 over many years requires knowledge of mechanics, skill in installing steel plate, ability to wire industrial electrical systems, understanding of old compressor fan systems, and knowledge of mine tunnel characteristics. These skills are not common in the general population, but are quite typical among those who have worked in mining, industrial maintenance and repair, or maintenance of tunnels, gas stations, or old infrastructure. Analysis of weld marks, bolt torque patterns, and ventilation fan installation style shows the offender was not only knowledgeable, but had practical hands-on experience, as the metal chamber structure was robust enough to survive years without collapse. Despite the damp, low conditions of the tunnel, from these characteristics, the investigative team concluded the offender very likely had prior contact with Northridge No. 3, possibly a former mine worker before the tunnel was closed, or someone who participated in a survey, maintenance or cleanup project during the period when authorities managed the area. The ability to keep the tunnel's electrical system operational also proves he knew how to access a nearby power source or had the ability to install a secondary supply. This is not amateur-level skill. After establishing the behavioral pattern and technical capability, the team applied geoprofiling to determine the offender's movement trajectory across the missing persons cases. When all 5 scenes were plotted on the map, a spatial pattern emerged. The offender operated within an elongated oval area, approximately 12 miles long, stretching from Cascade Creek to Bowen, Baker Trail, with the center of activity located near Northridge No. 3. All disappearances fell within zones accessible from the tunnel via narrow forest paths or little-known slopes, allowing the offender to move quickly between the tunnel and crime scenes without leaving clear boot prints on main trails. By analyzing the time of disappearance, mostly between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m., investigators inferred the offender had a flexible schedule but did not operate too late, avoiding the risk of encountering hikers using flashlights or overnight campers. This suggests the subject may live or work near the area, enabling quick access to the forest before full darkness. Geoprofiling indicates the center of the offender's activity is most likely within a 3-5 mile radius of Northridge No. 3, meaning he either resides in the small community near Grand Lake or has a temporary shelter secondary bunker in the forest. To build a suspect list, the team collected labor records from the past 3 decades, especially lists of mining workers, mechanical repair technicians, tunnel maintenance personnel, and individuals who participated in Northridge surveys during 1990-2010. Simultaneously, they cross-referenced residency records, hunting licenses, truck registrations, and vehicle entry-exit data for the forest over many years. Initial results yielded a list of nearly 40 individuals with varying degrees of matching skills and backgrounds. The list was then narrowed by movement range, only those living in or near Grand Lake, owning off-road vehicles, having unscheduled work hours, and having appeared in the North Inlet area during the periods of the disappearances were retained. After further filtering for minor criminal records, stalking behavior, or reports of unusual presence on trails, the list shrank to 12 individuals. Finally, when all data was cross-checked against the behavioral model, especially the ability to access Northridge No. 3 undetected and maintain the old compressor fan, the team formed a core suspect group consisting of several individuals with past infrastructure maintenance experience or seasonal mining-related work in the area. These individuals became the focus of the next investigative phase as the offender profile shifted from behavioral description to real-world identity determination through residence, travel history, and correlation with the disappearances over 7 years. After the core suspect list was narrowed to about a dozen individuals potentially linked to the series of disappearances, the investigative team moved into the data cross-referencing phase to identify who among them best matched the offender's operational capability, condition, and movement history. The first focus was reviewing old personnel records from agencies that had managed or accessed the Northridge No. 3 area, including U.S. Forest Service maintenance crews, mining companies that once operated around Grand Lake, and technical survey teams that inspected the tunnel system during the 1990s, 2010s. Several individuals on the suspect list had held positions requiring mechanical skills, steel installation, and ventilation system maintenance. Notably, 4 people had been present during the 2006 Northridge No. 3 portal reinforcement project, of whom 2 had since left the state, 1 had passed away, and 1, Jonas Creed, still resided in the Grand Lake area. Jonas had worked 7 years in tunnel maintenance before transitioning to mechanical equipment repair for a small contracting company. Employment records showed he had skills in welding, compressor fan installation, and handling steel plate in damp environments. These skills matched almost perfectly with the technical traces at Northridge No. 3. The next step was cross-referencing movement history using cell tower data. Investigators collected location data within a 3-mile radius of all 5 disappearance scenes during the late afternoon window on the respective dates. Results showed most suspects had no phone signal in the area at those exact times. Some were out of state, others were working fixed shifts. Only Jonas Creed repeatedly appeared in the coverage area near North Inlet, Bowen, Baker, and Tonahutu during time frames matching 4 of the 5 disappearances. His signal was not continuous, often activating for just a few minutes before going completely dark upon entering no coverage zones. Consistent with the pattern of someone parking at the forest edge and walking into side trails. Data from 2017 and 2019 was particularly noteworthy. Cell towers recorded Jonas's phone signal near the trailhead around 4:30 p.m. Only 30-40 minutes before the 2 victims in those cases were determined missing. When overlaid on the geo-profiling activity map, Jonas was the only person on the suspect list who repeatedly appeared near the behavioral center of gravity without any legitimate reason. Following movement data, Investigators examined financial behavior and purchase history of the suspects, focusing on items found at the scene such as yellow paracord, high-strength nylon rope, ISO 32 machine oil, and steel plate. Results showed Jonas had purchased small quantities of yellow paracord from an outdoor gear store in Granby in 2016, 2017, and 2019. Coinciding with 3 disappearances where cut paracord was found at the scenes. He also had multiple purchases of compressor machine oil in 2020 and 2021 of a type matching samples found in Evan's hair and respiratory tract. Additionally, Jonas purchased thin steel plate from a building supply store in Fort Collins in 2018, with the invoice specifying dimensions very close to the steel used to line the confinement chamber in Northridge No. 3. Another notable point was Jonas's pattern of small but regular expenditures on bolts, handheld tool kits, and industrial lighting equipment, even though his repair job did not require such supplies, according to employment records. This aligns with the technical conclusion that the Northridge No. 3 chamber had been reinforced and maintained over time, not simply installed once and abandoned. When investigators gathered residency and social behavior information, Jonas's profile continued to stand out. He lived alone in a small house, less than 3 miles from a forest entrance, had no close family in Colorado, minimal community interaction, and frequently entered the forest alone during late afternoons. The same time frame as the victim's disappearances, neighbors reported he often carried a bulky backpack and mechanical tools when heading into the forest, unlike typical hikers. Some had complained that Jonas frequently appeared near trailheads at odd hours, though no one had reported him because there was no direct disruptive behavior. When all data was cross-referenced, technical skills, employment history, financial behavior, matching purchase patterns, proximity to crime scenes, residence near geo-profiling hotspots, and forest entry habits aligning with offense times, Jonas Creed emerged as the most prominent suspect. No other individual on the list matched at such a high level across all data categories. The investigative team officially designated Jonas as the primary suspect, moving the case into covert surveillance and direct evidence collection to determine whether he was the operator of the Northridge No. 3 confinement chamber and responsible for the entire 7-year series of disappearances. After Jonas Creed was designated the primary suspect, the investigative team shifted to active surveillance to collect direct behavioral data confirming his level of involvement in the disappearance series. A surveillance system was deployed within a 5-mile radius of Jonas's residence, including infrared cameras mounted on trees, motion sensors, real-time data recorders, and short-range audio receivers placed at locations where cell tower data showed Jonas frequently appeared. The cameras were camouflaged with artificial bark covers and positioned 15-20 feet high to avoid detection, while motion sensors were buried under thin soil near trailheads to record when he left home and his direction of travel. During the first 18 nights, Jonas maintained the same activity pattern as in past data, leaving home in late afternoon or early dusk, carrying a large backpack and sometimes mechanical tools, traveling along trails leading to North Inlet, then losing signal upon entering dense forest. He almost never interacted with anyone, did not go with friends, and consistently chose late afternoon hours, matching the time frame of the 4 previous victims. Investigators noted that Jonas often paused at the same small clearing 0.7 miles from the trailhead, a location where unusual boot prints had previously been found at 2 disappearance scenes. Each time he reached this spot, he stood still for 2-3 minutes, adjusted his backpack straps, sometimes bent down to handle something on the ground, then continued deeper into the forest. Infrared cameras captured images of Jonas dragging a long rolled object, approximately 1 meter in length, on 3 separate nights. Size consistent with rolls of yellow paracord, previously recovered from earlier scenes. Reviewing the movement timeline, investigators discovered Jonas's habit of turning on his phone for a few minutes before entering the forest, then completely powering it off, matching the offender's pattern, using the phone only near populated areas to avoid losing coverage, but not carrying it into no-signal zones to reduce tracking risk. The peak of suspicion occurred on night 26, when audio sensors recorded metallic clanging sounds from the area north of North Ridge number 3 only 12 minutes. Only 12 minutes after cameras recorded Jonas passing the previous intersection point. Audio analysis indicated sounds consistent with steel hinges, opening, closing, or a metal sliding door, matching Evan's memory description of heavy metal sliding along a short track. Night 29 provided even clearer corroboration. Infrared cameras at the North Ridge number 3 side entrance captured Jonas bending down to inspect the corroded steel ventilation grill, an action identical to the fan system maintenance activity previously concluded by the monitoring team. He carried a tool bag containing pliers, wrenches, and a rubber mallet, items previously used to adjust steel plates inside the tunnel. Reviewing movement data from prior weeks, pressure sensor footprints recorded on side paths matched a size 11B boot pattern, consistent with boot impressions found at 2 disappearances in 2017-2019. On day 34, the team decided to initiate Phase 2, close target follow, and direct evidence collection. A remote tracking device attached to Jonas's pickup truck recorded him transporting a large wooden crate into the forest before dark. The crate's dimensions resembled those of a heavy mechanical tool container, but investigators suspected it could be used to transport a larger object. The most unusual finding was that on the return trip, the crate was no longer on the vehicle. Checking the forest area where he stopped the longest, sensors recorded low-level ground vibration consistent with dragging a heavy object across the earth, matching the style of metal container dragging Evan described in fragmented memories. This was sufficient for investigators to conclude Jonas was not merely hiking, but actively preparing or maintaining a confinement facility. On day 37, after gathering sufficient incriminating factors, identity, movement patterns, scene-matching supplies, tunnel maintenance activity, forensic corroborating sounds, and behavior involving transport of heavy objects into remote areas, the investigative team proceeded with the arrest of Jonas Creed. The arrest occurred at 6:42 p.m. Immediately after Jonas returned from the North Inlet trailhead. He did not resist, but showed signs of surprise and attempted to shield his backpack as if trying to conceal something inside. The backpack was sealed on-site and transferred to the forensics lab, further strengthening the chain of evidence for the upcoming legal investigation phase. Immediately after Jonas Creed was arrested, the investigative team moved into the phase of voice analysis and statement cross-referencing to determine the degree of direct connection between him and primary site, one of the key links needed to prove prolonged detention. The forensic voice acquisition procedure was implemented within the first 24 hours, in full compliance with NIST standards, recording in a soundproof room using 2 directional microphones, a reference oscillator for frequency calibration, and 3 standard reading sets consisting of spontaneous sentences, structured sentences, and isolated phoneme sequences. Jonas showed minimal cooperation, answering each prompt in a low, hoarse voice with slow articulation, interspersed with restrained tension when asked to repeat sequences containing the weak phonemes /k//grez/ the exact sounds Evan had described as the noises the man made every time he opened the metal door. After collecting a full set of 60 voice samples, the data was processed through a voice print analysis system using Mel frequency substral coefficients to generate Jonas's voice map, including timbre spectrum, formants, amplitude variation, and average pitch contour. The forensic team then matched this voice print against the sound descriptions Evan had provided from memory. Short utterances from a man with compressed articulation, rapid breathing in a metallic space, and especially the distinctive click at the end of sentences, an effect produced by rapid glottal closure in a narrow, reverberant metal environment. Comparative analysis overlaid the 2 voice prints, revealing up to 87% similarity in the Formant 1 and Formant 2 regions, a level of match rarely seen in random cases. The highest degree of correspondence occurred in the short, abrupt adjustment sound Jonas unconsciously made when shifting posture, which matched the sound Evan had heard when the perpetrator opened the bunker door and stepped inside. This was critical evidence because Evan had no direct contact with Jonas after being recovered, making self-generated matching impossible. In parallel with the voice analysis, the investigative team executed a federal search warrant on Jonas's residence, focusing on recording devices, handheld recorders, and any materials related to bunker structures. Inside the house, they discovered an old laptop, a detached 500 GB hard drive, and a plastic box containing 14 analog cassette tapes. The computer had basic encryption. Once accessed, investigators found a folder named Notes, containing dozens of text files, rough sketches of bunker diagrams with precise measurements of steel walls, ventilation duct lengths, and notes on suitable bolt types for humid environments. Several sketches recorded dimensions closely matching the characteristics of primary site. Among the cassette tapes, 4 contained continuous recordings of fan noise, footsteps moving across metal surfaces, and especially a male voice issuing short commands such as "step back," "don't go near the door," "sit down." The team digitized these tapes and ran them through the voice-print comparison model using the newly collected Jonas samples. Average match rates across 3 tapes ranged from 80–89%, sufficient to conclude with near certainty that the person on the tapes and Jonas were the same individual. This was pivotal evidence because in his initial statement, Jonas had claimed he never entered any abandoned bunkers and knew nothing about any metal structures in the forest. The discovery of the sketches and recordings directly contradicted all of his denials. Additionally, device logs showed files created sporadically between 2016 and 2020, perfectly aligning with the timeline of the 4 new disappearances. Metadata checks revealed some files were created on the exact day before or after a victim went missing. Investigators further compared Jonas's claim of only going into the forest for physical training against field evidence. Boot prints recovered at the scenes matched the boot type Jonas purchased in 2015. Yellow paracord found in 3 disappearances matched the paracord he bought at Granby. Compressor oil recovered from the bunker matched the composition of the oil he purchased for personal air compressors. When questioned about the wooden crate he transported into the forest on the night of day 34, Jonas claimed it was just an old discarded box from a previous project, but trunk inspection revealed metal dust traces from Northridge No. 3 itself, while ground vibration analysis that night showed the crate being dragged toward the bunker. This data completely contradicted his statement. The team also cross-referenced Jonas's cell phone signal history against his claim of never going near North Inlet at night. Cell tower data placed him in proximity to every disappearance within 40 minutes before each victim lost contact. When confronted, Jonas remained silent, requesting only a lawyer. In the comprehensive behavioral analysis, the team assessed Jonas's connection to primary site across 3 categories: technical capability, physical traces, and audio evidence. All 3 converged. Northridge No. 3 had been repaired with techniques consistent with Jonas's skills. The voice on the tapes matched his voice print, and physical evidence, such as restraints, ventilation fans, and steel construction aligned with materials Jonas had purchased over the previous 7 years. The final forensic assessment concluded that Jonas Creed had direct, repeated, and prolonged association with primary site at a very high level, sufficient for prosecution on charges of kidnapping, prolonged detention, and serious bodily harm against Evan Kearns, with likely connection to the other disappearances in the same area. After completing voice analysis and statement cross-referencing, the investigative team focused on exploiting indirect information obtained from objects, diagrams, and device logs found in Jonas's residence to locate a second detention bunker where geological forensics from Evan's shoe soles had previously suggested he was not held at a single location. A crude sketch found on Jonas's laptop consisting of only 3 lines in the notation. Verse 2 was determined to mark an alternate or backup site, especially since it was accompanied by the character string LT47E, consistent with Jonas's previous file naming pattern for recordings. Cross-referencing with USGS archived geological maps, LT47E matched the code for an area with limestone strata containing low-purity iron ore, located approximately 4.8 miles as the crow flies from Northridge No. 7. 3. A site that once housed a small abandoned mine tunnel from 1974 that was never fully sealed. Combined with the low-purity hematite dust found on Evan's clothing, inconsistent with primary site's mineral composition, investigators concluded it was highly likely Jonas had used this tunnel as a secondary site. Due to the hazardous nature of the abandoned mine and the possibility of mechanical traps left by the perpetrator, the approach was classified as high risk. A multidisciplinary tactical team consisting of Larimer County SWAT, Park Service structural engineers, and confined space specialists was deployed at 4:50 a.m. to avoid detection should any accomplice be monitoring communications. Equipment included micro cameras on flexible cables, small tracked robots for floor stability checks, and toxic gas sensors to detect SEOC, methane, or signs of organic decomposition. Upon reaching the bunker entrance, the tactical team discovered fresh ATV tire tracks on the ground, indicating Jonas or someone else had been there shortly before his arrest. The entrance was concealed by a thin aluminum sheet camouflaged with branches. Underneath was a reinforced downward passage using new steel beams, similar reinforcement style to primary site. A scout robot was sent in first, recording faint light from a low-hanging source, steady vibration from a small ventilation fan, and high humidity. At 24 meters in, the robot detected a small steel chamber with an exterior sliding bar lock. The tactical team breached the door using low-noise breaching procedures, and as the door cracked open, they heard short, weak breathing and immediately confirmed a living person inside. The victim, a woman approximately 30 years old, later identified as Violet Harrow, missing since September of the previous year in Estes Park, was found in a state of extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and visual impairment, with old restraint marks on wrists and ankles, nearly identical to those on Evan's body. She was extracted on a soft stretcher, handed over to medical personnel, and immediately transported to Poudre Valley Hospital for emergency treatment. Throughout the extraction, the victim repeatedly uttered disjointed phrases such as "lights go off on schedule," "footsteps on metal," "sliding door," phrases perfectly consistent with the environmental pattern Evan had described. Once stabilized and able to speak for a few minutes, Violet confirmed that her captor had a deep voice, spoke very little, usually issued only short commands, and arrived at fixed times each day, information matching the voice print obtained from Jonas. Evidence recovered from the chamber, including restraint type, lighting source, and ventilation fan installation style, showed complete design consistency with primary site, reinforcing the conclusion that Jonas Creed had operated at least 2 detention sites over the course of many years. Following the rescue of Violet Harrow and the recovery of a large volume of evidence from both primary site and secondary site, the investigative team proceeded to reconstruct the perpetrator's complete operational timeline over 7 years. From Evan Kearns' disappearance in 2015 to Violet's detention in 2021, thereby establishing a far more consistent and sophisticated criminal pattern than initially anticipated. Based on the synthesis of geological data, cell tower records, movement patterns, Jonas's purchases, and forensic analysis from both bunkers, the team determined that the perpetrator operated in 3 fixed phases: reconnaissance, abduction, victim stabilization in the bunker. This cycle repeated every 12 to 18 months depending on the period, aligning with the intervals of the 5 disappearances, 4 of which remained unsolved until Evan's return. The reconnaissance phase began when the perpetrator approached low-traffic trail sections, primarily between 3:30 and 5:30 p.m., the time when victims were often alone and the forest light was fading. Covert surveillance camera data showed Jonas appearing at 5 different trailheads in the same season, each time observing for only a few minutes before leaving, demonstrating behavior consistent with assessing foot traffic density prior to target selection. He prioritized solo hikers carrying minimal gear, walking steadily, and without dogs, the most controllable group according to BA analysis. After selecting a target, Jonas typically exploited dense forest terrain and cell phone dead zones to close in. Forensics from scenes and Evan's account indicate the perpetrator used pre-cut yellow paracord in 1.2, 1.4 meter lengths to rapidly restrain hands and neck, possibly in just seconds with mechanical knot tying skills. The abduction mechanism was described as approach from behind, take down, restrain with cord, drag off trail, matching compression marks found at 3 scenes. After restraint, the perpetrator transported victims using a small, unregistered ATV, pre-positioned 0.5, 1 mile from the trailhead. Ground vibration analysis and tire tracks around secondary site showed consistent ATV movement patterns across incidents, with machine oil residue on the ground chemically matching the type Jonas purchased. Victim transport distance from capture point to detention bunker typically ranged from 2-4 miles, mainly along unmarked secondary trails or mountain paths to minimize identifiable traces. The detention phase was the most sophisticated component of the entire operation. Both bunkers, primary site and secondary site, demonstrated years of painstaking renovation by the perpetrator, particularly through steel plate reinforcement, mechanical ventilation installation, and timed lighting systems designed to disrupt victims' circadian rhythms and erode time perception. Each bunker was divided into 2 compartments, an inner holding chamber and an outer equipment/storage/tool area. This design allowed the perpetrator to minimize direct contact with victims, opening the door only during fixed time windows, making it impossible for captives to track day or night. Metal wear marks at both primary and secondary sites indicated regular maintenance checks on steel chamber stability, hinge regrinding, and fan tie replacement, proving Jonas sustained the detention environment over extended periods rather than temporarily. Tools he used: paracord, small halogen lights, machine oil, medium bolts, thin steel plates, were purchased sporadically over many years, avoiding any large suspicious buying patterns. Jonas also employed special concealment methods, leaving no personal items, limiting entry with minimally worn soles to reduce tread identification, and applying machine oil to hinges to muffle sound. Though the oil smell and compressor dust composition ultimately became forensic tracers, leading back to him. Overall behavioral assessment indicates a highly calculated subject who did not kill victims, but instead maintained long-term detention environments, likely driven by control needs rather than infliction of injury. Using 2 alternating bunkers allowed him to spread risk and sustain operations undetected for 7 years. This complete behavioral system, reconnaissance locations, abduction time windows, restraint methods, transport mechanics, detention structures, and bunker maintenance cycles formed a uniform pattern throughout the entire case series, matching forensic traces, victim statements, and field data in full. After the entire investigation process was completed with the confirmation of 2 detention bunkers, 2 surviving victims, and a volume of forensic evidence exceeding the minimum standard for state-level prosecution, the Federal Prosecutor's Office for the Colorado District proceeded to formally announce the indictment against Jonas Creed on 3 counts of particularly serious federal crimes. Federal kidnapping under 18 U.S.C. Section 1201, prolonged unlawful detention causing bodily injury under Section 242, and intentional infliction of serious bodily injury, resulting in permanent impairment under Section 113(a)(6). The federal nature of the case was established based on Jonas's use of federal infrastructure as the crime scene area, transportation of victims across county lines, and construction of detention facilities within a government-owned abandoned mine shaft system. From the very first hearing, the prosecution stated that the case exhibited a level of violence and premeditation rarely seen in Colorado in recent decades, while announcing their intention to seek the maximum penalty, including unconditional life imprisonment without parole. Jonas Creed's trial officially began on the morning of April 3, 2022, at the federal courthouse in Denver, under special security measures due to the possibility that additional missing persons related to the case remained unidentified. The prosecution first presented the forensic evidence group involving DNA, epithelial cells recovered from the inside of a glove found in the primary site, matched Jonas's DNA sample at 99.82%, while a broken hair found near the hinge of the secondary site carried Violet Harrow's DNA, confirming she had been held there. Fibers from Evan's clothing stuck to a bolt at the primary site showed mixed DNA, with 73% matching Jonas, completely ruling out random coincidence. Next came the geological dust evidence group. Forensic geology determined that soil samples from the treads of Jonas's shoes contained mineral particles of quartz, mica, and hematite, a composition that perfectly matched the Northridge Zone layer and did not appear in any residential area surrounding his home. Dust recovered from Evan's lungs contained carbon soot from a small compressor fan, identical to the soot adhering to the ventilation ducts of the secondary site, and consistent with the ISO 32 oil Jonas purchased regularly. The prosecution also presented the paracord evidence chain, segments of yellow paracord cut during Evan's disappearance, and 3 other missing persons cases showed 100% identical twisted fiber structure to paracord Jonas had purchased in Granby, as confirmed by financial records. The clean, sharp cuts on the cord matched the specialized cutting tool Jonas owned. Bootprint evidence was presented through sole comparison. Prints recovered from 2 disappearances in 2017 and 2019 matched size 11B boots Jonas had purchased online. The unusual wear pattern on the rear edge of the left sole precisely matched the wear observed when his shoes were examined upon arrest. Forensic voice print analysis was one of the most impactful pieces of evidence, analysis of audio from a cassette tape recovered from Jonas's home. The voice Evan described hearing inside the bunker, and Jonas's voice print recorded under standard procedure, showed 87% similarity in formant 1, 2 and 90% in transitional formants, a level of match so high it was virtually impossible to occur by chance. The prosecution emphasized that this was independent evidence confirming Jonas was the person present in the detention bunkers without relying on victim testimony. Cell tower data, Jonas's phone signal records proved he was near 4 of the 5 disappearance sites just tens of minutes before the victims vanished, with a consistent pattern of powering off his device upon entering deep forest areas. One particularly matching instance aligned with Violet Harrow's disappearance when his phone signal activated for exactly 3 minutes before shutting down at the precise moment her GPS log stopped transmitting. After the physical evidence, the prosecution called Evan Kearns to the witness stand. Evan appeared frail but stable, calmly describing the sequence of sounds, lighting, and daily rhythms inside the bunker, including the perpetrator's punctual appearances, operation of the metal door, and the deep, curt voice he had heard hundreds of times. Evan identified the recording taken from Jonas's home and confirmed that's the same person. Next, Violet Harrow was brought forward in a wheelchair but spoke clearly. She described how the perpetrator delivered food, controlled lighting, and warned her not to get near the door. She confirmed she never saw his face but recognized the voice on the recording and the sound of footsteps on metal flooring. Both testimonies were completely consistent and mutually reinforcing. The prosecution concluded its case by arguing that all evidence, DNA, geology, voice print, boot prints, paracord, cell tower data, and victim testimony converged on a single point. Jonas Creed was the person who designed, operated, and maintained the 2 detention bunkers over 7 years, carrying out a deliberate series of abductions and inflicting long-term harm on the victims. The defense attempted to challenge the voice print collection procedure and suggested possible phonetic mimicry, but the FBI audio expert explained that voice print analysis relies not on subjective voice qualities, but on the geometric structure of laryngeal resonance, a near impossible to imitate individual characteristic. The defense also argued that cell tower data could not pinpoint exact locations due to radius error margins, but the prosecution countered by presenting multi-year signal overlay data showing Jonas as the only individual present near most disappearance sites at the critical times. They further claimed the primary site could have been built by someone else and that Jonas had merely coincidentally left DNA there from prior work nearby. The prosecution immediately countered with evidence that design sketches of the bunker found on Jonas's laptop matched every detail of the steel structure at the primary site. No one coincidentally draws a confinement chamber accurate to the millimeter compared to the actual scene. When the defense tried to suggest an unidentified accomplice, the prosecution presented 7 years of material purchase records showing a consistent 6 to 8 month cycle, proving Jonas was the only person purchasing paracord, bolts, steel plates, and compressor oil in patterns matching each disappearance. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that Jonas not only carried out the abductions, but actively maintained the detention environment using technical knowledge, turning victims into prisoners inside steel chambers he personally designed and reinforced. They concluded this was a prolonged, deliberate, meticulously planned crime, not an impulsive act. After 4 days of trial, the jury retired to deliberate. Despite hundreds of pieces of evidence, deliberation lasted just over 3 hours, a sign of near total unanimity. Upon returning, the foreperson stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Jonas Creed stood motionless, eyes fixed on the floor, while Evan and Violet quietly held hands. Sentencing took place 1 week later. The federal judge stated that Jonas represented an extremely grave threat to the community and national park safety, that he had deprived human beings of liberty for years by creating inhuman confinement environments. Given the especially heinous nature of the crimes, the judge imposed the maximum sentence, federal life imprisonment without parole, no possibility of reduction, and ineligible for transfer for the first 40 years. This was regarded as one of the strongest sentences in Colorado for a kidnapping case without fatalities, reflecting both the extreme danger posed by Jonas Creed and the immeasurable harm inflicted on the survivors. Following the life without parole sentence for Jonas Creed, focus shifted to the recovery of the surviving victims and assessment of the long-term consequences of the 7-year crime spree on the Rocky Mountain community. Evan Kearns, after extended treatment at Poudre Valley Hospital, was transferred to an intensive recovery program for long-term confinement survivors, including multimodal therapy, physical therapy to rebuild atrophied muscle groups, light therapy to readjust circadian rhythms disrupted by years in lightless cells, and long-term psychological treatment to address complex issues such as night terrors, time disorientation, and persistent feelings of being watched. Evan regained the ability to walk after 3 months and began recovering a sense of time after nearly 6 months, though treating physicians indicated it could take years to fully restore spatial cognition and control of reflexes triggered by metal sounds. Violet Harrow's recovery progressed more slowly due to severe malnutrition and higher-level psychological trauma, particularly auditory alarm, extreme hypersensitivity to footsteps or background vibrations. She was treated in a specially protected area with complete avoidance of metal noises to prevent re-traumatization. Both participated in the federal victim assistance program, including legal counseling, financial support, and identity protection when necessary. For Evan's family, 7 years of alternating hope and despair created profound psychological shock upon his return alive. His parents shared that they had held a symbolic memorial in the 4th year of his disappearance, and his return felt like having to relearn how to know the son we once had. Evan could not immediately return to normal life due to the need for a controlled environment, requiring the family to completely readjust their household, changing residence to avoid triggers, setting up a soft-light private room, and attending government-supported family therapy. Evan's older brother, a veteran SAR member, reported still feeling guilty for not finding his brother over the years, reflecting deep psychological impact on search and rescue personnel who are accustomed to loss but rarely confront cases of prolonged captivity in areas they patrolled weekly. After the trial, the National Park Service and Rocky Mountain National Park implemented sweeping safety standard changes for hikers, including mandatory route registration for solo hikers, expanded trailhead camera coverage, and introduction of pinpoint check-in, automated stations for tracking movement in the backcountry. Rangers received retraining in identifying anomalous traces such as localized soil compaction, mismatched boot prints, and cleanly cut paracord, small signs previously overlooked. The events also triggered a statewide overhaul of Colorado SAR operations. Teams were equipped with portable seismic sensors, mineral dust detection devices for locating hidden bunkers, and AI modules for early pattern recognition in missing persons cases. The local communities of Grand Lake and Estes Park were deeply affected, especially families with loved ones who had gone missing over the years. Monthly community meetings were held to reassure residents and provide ongoing risk analysis. Rocky Mountain tourism temporarily declined in 2022 due to visitor concerns about undiscovered detention structures. However, what most concerned the community was not Jonas Creed's sentence, but the question of whether he was truly the sole perpetrator. Based on the forensic timeline, the two confirmed bunkers, and statements from both Evan and Violet, federal investigators acknowledged significant gaps in the 7-year period of Jonas's activity. Periods that did not correspond to any known disappearances. Certain geological traces in Evan's shoes indicated minerals inconsistent with both primary and secondary sites, suggesting the possible existence of a third undiscovered or dismantled location. Violet also mentioned one time being moved to another room, prompting investigators to reopen files on abandoned shafts within a 30-mile radius. This raised a major question whether additional undetected victims, living or deceased, remained in other hidden structures deep within the Rocky Mountains. With the trial concluded but many questions unanswered, the Federal Bureau of Investigation continues to maintain a dedicated task force monitoring underground sites and unresolved disappearances in the region, turning Jonas Creed's crime spree into the foundation for one of the largest trail safety monitoring programs in Rocky Mountain history. Looking back at the entire 7-year disappearance saga of Evan Kearns and the hidden crime series buried within the Rocky Mountains, one important truth emerges even in the environments considered safest and most familiar in America. National parks, stunning trails, peaceful small communities, danger can still lurk in unexpected corners. The fact that an individual like Jonas Creed could construct 2 steel detention bunkers, operate them for years, and maintain a sophisticated crime pattern without detection serves as a reminder that personal and community vigilance remains essential. The first lesson comes from Evan himself, a SAR volunteer who understood terrain and safety protocols, yet a single decision to separate from the group for a few minutes, a very common occurrence in American trekking culture, placed him under the perpetrator's control. This underscores that skill cannot replace the fundamental rule of never hike alone in deep wilderness that national parks repeatedly emphasize, yet many still disregard. The next lesson lies in the small signs, yellow paracord, anomalous boot prints, mineral dust, that appeared but were not properly noticed during initial searches. This shows that communities and volunteer teams must be better trained to recognize unusual indicators instead of automatically classifying every disappearance as a natural accident. Finally, Evan and Violet's story highlights the critical importance of long-term psychological support investment. In the United States, where over 600,000 people are reported missing each year and hundreds are never found, the recovery model Evan underwent, light therapy, circadian rhythm restoration, PTSD treatment, should become the national standard of care for all long-term confinement survivors. This story reminds us that America, for all its modernity, still contains blind spots that only vigilance, community cooperation, and respect for safety standards can fill. Thank you for following this haunting story to the end. If you'd like to continue joining us as we explore more American survival cases and mysteries, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next video, where we'll continue peeling back stories in which the truth always lies deeper than what we first see.